We continue Likutei Moharan Vav. We began yesterday with Rebbe Nachman teaching us about the essence of teshuva, bringing a person to a lifestyle of kavod that's focused not on oneself, that's focused on something higher. Rebbe Nachman called that kavod elikim. That comes from the pasuk kavod elikim haster davar, and kavod malachim is chakar davar. And the Rebbe learned that chakar davar means that if a person is not ra'ui for kavod that person is experiencing, and the person is focused on one's own self, as opposed to something loftier, as opposed to something higher, as opposed to being a channel, to attempt to bring the world to a place of malchus to kedusha, the elevation of malchus, which we've been learning about in the previous Torahs. That's the major or a main or primary focus of Rebbe Nachman and the whole sefer is tikkun malchus, the final gilui ha'eshali tukar ad bias HaMashiach. Then he says, this is his whole tikkun, right, is to reveal the consciousness of Mashiach in the world, to help us live in a malchus to kedusha where the nun is reflecting the light of the ches, to help us get out of the oisios that are pegumais, right, from Torah Dalid through the averis that are chakuk on the bones, right, and to elevate malchus in that way. And in Torah Hey, for a person to live Chochmah erosav helatavase, all of this, that a person is able to live in a consciousness of Geulah, Torah Beis, Tikkun Abris, Tefillah, it's all about the same inyan of being able to live in that world. That's called Kfod Elikim. And Kfod Elikim haster davar. If a person's living in that place of Kfod Elikim, asor lachgar lakavod hazeh, there's no chakira, and that person is just a representative of the king, like the royal crier that we mentioned yesterday as a mashal. And the Rebbe told us that in order to access this kind of lifestyle, the portal to that kind of experience is teshuva. And the Rebbe says in his Geulah that the essence of teshuva is to hear a person's own self being embarrassed and not to respond, and not to say anything, for a person to hear their embarrassment and to stay silent. And then the Rebbe explained this in a much deeper way, where the Rebbe gave us a whole chain of concepts, and the Rebbe linked kavod and teshuva. Then on the one hand you have kavod. Kavod is chaf, because you can't have kavod without the letter chaf. Chaf is keser. Keser is ekya, and ekya is teshuva. And the Rebbe helped us work our way back from the end of the chain, which is ekya, all the way back to kavod, in saying that ekya is teshuva. How? Because ekya is ana zamin lemeheve. Ekya means I am ready to become. Because before a person does teshuva, kilu ein avaya ba'olam, because toivlo shaloi nivra misha nivra. Ekya means I am ready to become. Keser is connected to ekya, but keser is also connected to teshuva, because keser means to wait, even though it means a crown, but it could also mean katar li ze'er va'achaveka, wait for me a little bit and I will speak. Katar, what does waiting have to do with teshuva? Habalatar Messiah, the mashal is that a person comes to buy some spices, ayrim loy, and they tell that person hamtein. And the Rebbe made a big deal out of this word hamtein to say that hamtein is actually the essence of the whole teshuva process, where a person is waiting. Thank you so much. Hamtein. And that's a very, very important nekuda in the teshuva process for a person to know that not everything is so smooth all the time. And one of the Mefarshim actually says, I skipped this over yesterday, but one of the tzaddikim says that itself, that word hamtein, with the lesson that teshuva is not so smooth all the time, and a person has to stay with the process, and a person has to go slow and not rush into things, and not allow themselves to be confounded by obstacles, is itself the siyua of habalatar Messiah. Meaning, the Gemara says that a person who comes to do teshuva, Messiah say they help you. Then it gives a whole mashal of a person who comes to do comes to buy spices. The shop owner tells him hamtein because I want to be there with you. So ostensibly, learning the mashal in the Gemara means the I want to be there with you is the siyua, but it doesn't describe what that looks like. Right? It doesn't describe. It just means that the balabais, which is Hashem, wants to be a part of the process. So it's Rav Kremer, I think, one of the Breslover Mashpiyim, in his incredible sefer Maimon, one of my favorite pirushim on Likutei Moharan, one of the deepest that I've found. The tzaddik says that the siyua, the help from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's hinted to in Habbalah Tahir, or referenced in Habbalah Tahir, a person who comes to do teshuva, Messiah, say they help you, is itself this that the Balabayas tells the person, Hamtein, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling the Jew, Hamtein. That is the greatest help, because if you don't know Hamtein, you're going to fall off of it. And Rebbe Nachman is actually going to the core of that Gemara, teaching you what that Siyua Milamala is, what that Ezer is, what that help is, that Abalatar Messiah say, because I'm like Hamtein. Fascinating. Then the Rebbe says, so what does that mean? That a person needs to be silent, and somehow being silent kickstarts the whole tshuva process. Says the Rebbe, silence means that a person is getting out of their ego. A person is nullifying their own sense of self, and a person is getting to a place where they recognize that it's not about me, and actually a person is mevatel legamre, and a person is willing to forego their own kavod, and that's a surefire way for a person to do tshuva. We said tshuva is tashav heila mekayma, to return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then the Rebbe said that this is true etymologically as well in a deeper way, because ekya is gematria 21. And Ekya, like we said, hints to this, that a person is actually ready to begin a tshuva process. They haven't done tshuva yet, but on a zamin l'meheve, they're ready to become. What about if a person is not ready to become? Says the Rebbe, that's called Ekya v'achzaras panam mimenu, or acharayim. Ekya is there, but it's completely concealed. It's potential in potential. And that is gematria dam. Because if you take Ekya and you do Aleph Hey, or Aleph Hey, Yud, and Aleph Hey, Yud Hey, that together is equal to dam. And dam is the dam shebachalal hasmali shebalev, where a person is in a state of ubayza yikalu, and that's the place of the Yetzer Hara. And how do you get out of that? By transferring and transforming dam into dome. Same letters, completely different word, from blood to silence. When a person hears themselves being embarrassed, and instead of responding, they are silent, that takes the experience of dam, turns it into doim. That's the bechina of doim laHashem v'hischaylaloi. If a person is silent for HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'hischaylaloi, says the Gemara in Gittin, v'hu yapalocha chalalim chalalim, that will create corpses or vacancies. That's a reference, says Rebbe Nachman, to what David HaMelech says, v'libi chalal b'kirbi, because it was prior filled with dam, and now it turned through daim into a chalal. And that's a bechina of Zvichas Yetzer. And Zvichas Yetzer, the Gemara says the Sanhedrin, is referenced in the pasuk Zaveach Taida Yichab Danani, that a person who brings a Taida, which the Gemara says is talking about a person who shechs the Yetzer Hara, right, taking all the dam out of that Chal Asmali Shabalev, like David HaMelech V'libi Chalal B'kirbi, that's produced by Daim LaHashem V'hischaylaloi, that is Yichab Danani, that brings a person to kavod, and that is the transmission from Ekya, or really even before Ekya, of Dam, and then Ekya, and then Keser, and then Chaf, and then Kavod. So we begin with Eis Gimel. Says the Heilige Rebbe, Schus Yagon Leidim Al Kol Yisrael, Amen. Says the Tzaddik, Mitzarech Lecho is Tamid B'midas HaTshuva, and a person always constantly needs to be holding on to the experience of Tshuva. It isn't just one time a year. It isn't just in the beginning of Elul. It's mamish constantly. It's a person's whole life is this experience, because really, like the Rebbe began with, Kitzarech Kol Adam L'mayit B'chvayt Atzmei, like this is the mission statement of a Jew in a certain way. And if you go back to Torah Aleph, where the Rebbe had another key, right? Ki Isha Yisraeli Tzarech Tamid L'Snakaba Seichel Shekol Davar. These two things are really reflective of the same energy, right? A person's always looking to find Hashem, to increase the makaim in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present and operates, and that's through a person finding the seichel and everything, recognizing that there's much more going on in the world than there's going on in my brain and my attempted control of the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intelligence fills everything. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's meaning, purpose, guidance, master plan, it fills everything. And that's the key over there, the key over here. And this is mamish the whole thing. This is why we're created. Baruch Hu Elokeinu shebaranu l'chvaydai. Right? We were literally created to bring kavod HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why we have dilanim and atayim and asal and teres emet. This is why. It's all to increase the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the presence of Hashem in the world. So Rebbe Nachman says, therefore, if that's the process of tshuva, tzarech le'echaz tamid b'midas hatshuva, a person needs to constantly be holding on to the experience of tshuva for two reasons. Number one, ki mi yomar zekisi li b'taharta mechatasi. The pasuk in Mishlei tells us, who can really say, my heart is pure, taharta mechatasi, I've been totally, clarified from my sin. Now that's true on a pashup shot of why a person would constantly need to be doing tshuva, because who can say that they ever really, really cleanse their heart? There are many different parts of tshuva. There's mechila, there's slicha, there's kapara. There are sort of deep blemishes in the neshama that a person needs to be in a constant state of tshuva, like David HaMelech says in Tehillim, v'chatasi negdi samid. Right, my chait is constantly aside from me. But the Rebbe learns that it means something even deeper. Because in this context, says the Rebbe, the word chatasi doesn't mean the sin, rather it's a reference to vidui. When a person says chatasi, avisi, pashati, I sinned. Says the Rebbe, when a person goes ahead and says, I sinned, I blemished, pashati, I rebelled, I willfully sinned against Hashem. Who says that a person's vidui is accurate? Who says that it was clear? Who says that it was appropriate? Who says that it was correct, b'li pniya, without some kind of ulterior motive? Because it is impossible, say the Mefarshim, for a person to do the initial vidui, all the while that a person is in a state of dam. Why? Because they're fundamentally living out of a place of ego. So that means there's nothing to bridge the gap between an egotistical, kvoid atzmi way of living and a tshuva that ostensibly is supposed to focus just on a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because there's nothing to bridge the gap. That means that fundamentally, from a person's primary tshuva, born out of an experience of dam, born out of experience of ego, there's going to necessarily be some kind of ulterior motive. Otherwise, what motivated the person? How did they suddenly go in 1 second? There is a concept like that, but how did a person go out of an experience of dam and all of a sudden be altruistically serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That means that the first tshuva is always necessarily going to contain some aspect of arrogance, some aspect of pniya, an ulterior motive, what's in it for me, and so on, which is beautiful, right? Because a person can do tshuva, midar shalol lishma, bal lishma, and a person is able to serve Hashem no matter what. But it isn't 1,000,000,000% pure. So v'zehu, says Rebbe Nachman, mi yoymar zikisi libi taharti mechatasi. Who can say my heart is cleansed? I am purified not from my sin, but from mechatasi, my saying chatasi avisi b'shati, meaning a reference to tshuva. Who can say that their heart is totally purified and they're so other focused that they're not doing tshuva for themselves? Obviously there's going to be something there, whether it's the sur meira aspect of wanting to stay away from Averis, right, because a person's afraid of punishment, or whether it's the Hasei Tov, a person wants to connect to Schar and Olam Haba, whatever it is. Afilu b'shasha aimer chatasi v'chulu, who can say that they're pure? V'zeo mi yoymar taharti mechatasi. Hanishi atar min chatasi avisi b'shati sha'amar, that a person should be totally cleansed, that when he's saying chatasi avisi b'shati, then a person is totally clean from pnius and from ulterior motives, and it is it's a tshuva that's pure. Because it's very likely that even in that moment a person isn't really 100,000,000% aligned, and obviously it's very holy because a person is still doing tshuva, and it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, and it's not one of the conditions of tshuva that a person has to have total purity from ulterior motives. Person is right? Charata ala avar, kabbalah ala asid, person does vidui, boom, tshuva works as long as it's with a whole heart. Rebbe Nachman's talking about a deeper level of clarity, which is fundamentally necessary once we understand tshuva in the context of kavod, right? That tshuva is supposed to bring a person to k'fayid alikim. If it's supposed to bring a person to k'fayid alikim, so then it's got to be mamish clear, and that means that a person will need to do what's called in Breslov, in this Torah, tshuva al tshuvasai, where it isn't just that a person is doing tshuva again. Actually, a person is reflecting on the process of tshuva itself, recognizing that itself needs tikkun, which is an incredibly lofty level, and the next step up. Nimtza, says the Rebbe, shetzarach la'aseh tshuva al hatshuva harishayna. One of me is more than enough. My wife will surely agree. Shetzarach la'aseh tshuva al tshuva harishayna. Right? A person needs to do tshuva on that process of tshuva because the tshuva itself was missing some kind of wholeheartedness. Hainu al hachatasi avisi b'shati shamar, right? About that tshuva, when a person has to do tshuva on the tshuva, not just going back to the chait, because the chait you did tshuva for, but the tshuva itself was done leiv shalem, right? With pnius, with ulterior motives. Got to go back and do tshuva on that tshuva. Ki olav namar, because about such a tshuva, it's possible that the pasuk in Yeshayahu will be referring to that kind of tshuva when it says b'svasav kibduni, that even though this person honored Hashem with his lips, and the words are specific because there is certainly an element of kavod there, even though it isn't complete kavod, right? But b'svasav kibduni, there is an aspect of kavod, or at least the person attempted to do tshuva and thereby bringing kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we said, a person's on the path to achieving Kvod Hashem, but still but there's a fundamental component that's missing where the person's heart is not in it. This is all very deep Kabbalistically, and I said we're only learning sort of Bikiyas. If you want to know the depth, this is talking about the construct of the Binah Malchus relationship, which is really what tshuva is all about, because tshuva is megas, as the Gemara tells us, Geulah tshuva shemegas at kisei hakavod. Tshuva reaches the kisei hakavod. Fascinatingly enough, we're going to learn about this a little bit later in the lesson. If a person takes the words kisei hakavod and you do kisei hakavod ba'acharayim, which is a very long gematria, it's a very long string of letters, so chaf and chaf samach and chaf samach aleph and chaf samach aleph chaf, and or hey and so on, all the way until you spell kisei hakavod, it is gematria tshuva. It's a fascinating thing. Geulah tshuva shemagas ad kisei hakavod. Right, it's like you're climbing up from chaf to samach, and then you fall back. Right, and that's hamtein. Person needs patience to be able to hold on to the process. Chaf samach aleph, then you fall back, and you keep on going up and up and up. Shemagas, eventually it reaches the kisei hakavod. That's all gematria tshuva. Kisei hakavod is in the world of Binah. Binah is connected to the lave. And inyan of Malchus is Dibor, like we already learned in Torah Dalid. And that's why, if you noticed, and again, I'm saying what I'm not getting into, so I'm just going to do this very quickly, but again and again and again and again is showing up the concept of speech. The essence of tshuva is to stop talking. Not only not to respond, but there's something in silence where a person resets their experience of Malchus to Sitra Achra, which is this world which is otherwise meaningless, stuttering, right? And just a world that's filled with Tumah, and a world that's shutting out the presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is coherent speech, because God created the world with coherent speech. And in order to disconnect from that kind of impure dibur, which again we spoke about in Torah Dalid, where the tzirufim of the loisa says are garbled, right? And it's different letters, and they switch around, and they get chakuk al atzmoisav, and that's the experience that a person lives in a world of malchus sitra achra. A person needs to disconnect from that by remaining silent. Once a person is silent, then a person can reorient themselves in connection with a dibur that's hopefully full of meaning. And that's why again and again you find, going down this list over here, in the Gemara, for example, about hamtein, what's the key words, maybe even more key than hamtein, if you could say, according to this, is abalat harmasayim, like mashallah echad shabaliknas aparsamain, oimrim loy hamtein. Right? A big asek is made of that. Oimrim loy, because it's all about dibur. And then when it comes to keser, connecting keser to the whole process, what do we say about keser? Keser is also an aspect of waiting. Kater li ze'er, wait for me a bit. And what's the next word? Va'achaveka. Achaveka means to speak. Right? Lashon chava. Right? Which is dibur. Right? Yom liyam yabia oimer v'layla l'layla. Yechavedas. A person hears that the whole world is speaking das, right, is mamish the das of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so over here, says Rebbe Nachman, if a person's tshuva process is incomplete, it could be that the malchus bit is correct, right? A person reoriented themselves vis-a-vis their malchus, but it's still not fundamentally perfect, because the last hey yud kevavke, which is malchus, the world of Asiya, is in fundamental disconnect still with that world of Binah, with the ideal world that's reflecting a malchus to kedusha, that world of the ima ilah, of the shchinta ilah, that world that's representative of what the world might look like one day, and besvasav kibduni, so that the lips are there, right? I mean, the mouth is there, the inyan of dibor, of malchus to kedusha is there, but v'liba richak mimeni, but it's still disconnected from bina, and that's a little bit of the deeper understanding. That's all one kind of tshuva al tshuvasai. Here the Rebbe goes, if you thought that was lofty, the Rebbe goes into a much, much loftier inyan, which is really incredible. And he says, and this is number 2, even if a person knows for him or herself sha'asa tshuva shlema, that the person absolutely did a complete tshuva, meaning they know that they did it without any peniyas. Maybe they did tshuva al tshuva, and that second tshuva, according to the Manda Amrim, and the Mefarshim over here that say that it's fundamentally impossible to really do a tshuva, a first tshuva, without any pniyas. There are other mahalchim as well, but according to that, let's say the person did tshuva al tshuva. So this time you know that your tshuva is good, right? Because this time you really did tshuva on the fact that the original tshuva was not tahar, because mi yomer zichisi libi taharti Mechatasi. So a person did a complete tshuva. Afal Pikein, says the Rebbe, even so. Tzarech lasu tshuva al tshuva harishayna. You have to go back and do tshuva on the first tshuva. Why? Ki mitchila, says the Rebbe, because originally that first tshuva, kishasa tshuva, asa lefi hasagasai. That person's tshuva was in accordance with his current conception of the divine. And a person is able to have certain definitions of what he is as a soul, what the act that he did is as an Aveira, and who the being is that he's intending to serve, right, who told him not to do that, as a definition of what the deity is, and what a Kadosh Baruch Hu is. And Mamela, the tshuva that the person does is working within the definitive parameters of all those things. That I am coming to do tshuva to return to Hashem for the Aveira that I did, right? But all those definitions have a certain limitation. Says the Rebbe, once a person does tshuva, va'achar kach bevadi k'sha'asa tshuva bevadi u'makar masig yoser es Hashem yisbarach. The very process of tshuva will, in and of itself, bring a person to a higher hasaga, to a greater and broader and deeper perception of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Mamela, once a person is now on a spiritually cleaner frequency, and a person's definitions of a Kadosh Baruch Hu and themselves and the Aveira expand from the standpoint of doing tshuva, and now being in a fundamentally different state of looking back and saying, I cannot believe that I did that. Like, what consciousness was I in? Because now a person is more elevated. Says the Rebbe, well, it turns out that the first tshuva that you did wasn't fully enough. It didn't fully encapsulate or reflect the severity of the sin, because a person's original tshuva thought that the Aveira was done vis-a-vis HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a certain level, and I did tshuva according to that hasaga. Once a person has a brand new hasaga in who Hashem is, and what the depth and the damage of an Aveira is, and how holy I am, meaning how holy a person's soul is, so all of a sudden it's like the first tshuva was inadequate. It didn't accurately reflect the severity of the sin, and therefore a person has to go back and do tshuva again, because it turns out that the first tshuva, right, again, was inadequate in terms of its reflection of what that process is. Says the Rebbe, now the person has a completely different perception of Hashem, and Nimsa, according to this new hasaga, according to the way that he views things now, it turns out that original hasaga was like a bechin of hakshama, meaning in relation to the person's new conception of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So it's like a person sheds their juvenile, almost like adolescent sort of idea of some like man in the sky or whatever it is, and in accordance with this new perception that as people, especially you're learning Hasidus, a person's learning the sefer, you're supposed to rise in your concept of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. I hope that we felt that already in the first 5 Torahs. You expand like what God is, what a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Torah is, how true it is, how deep it is, how real it is, how serious it is, the gravity of this thing, right? That every person needs to say, like we learned in Torah, hey, tzarech ha'adam, chayiv kol adam leimer b'shvi li nivra olam, like a person has a deeper hasaga. I can't slack off. What do you mean? I'm a shliach of the king. K'foid aleki. A person's in this world on a mission. Life is real. A person looks back and they start to do tshuva on this, that they were magshim in a certain way, that they corporealized, that they served HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a lower level of perception. Nimsa, therefore, or rather, it was an aspect of being magshim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of conceiving of God in a corporeal way, vis-a-vis, right, in relation to that. Therefore, a person needs to do tshuva on that original conception, because a person corporealized as Roimamus Alikusai HaKadosh Baruch Hu's exalted godliness. 2 diukim. Number 1 is it's possible to explain this from the standpoint not just generally of a concept of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, but specifically a concept of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's rachamim. Because originally when a person does an Aveira, the Yitzhar comes to tell a person there's no hope for you. Person does tshuva, all of a sudden they recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy is so much deeper than I thought it was. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy is so much deeper than I thought it was. If I had known how compassionate God was, I never would have done that Aveira, right? Meaning, in a certain sense, if I would have had this newfound relationship that I have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, because I've experienced Mincha Hashem Pshuta L'Kabel Shavim, and I've gone through a tshuva process, and I recognize the Chazdei Hashem Kilei Chalu Kilei Samara and Kilei Chalu Rachama, that Hashem's mercy is forever and ever. Gewalt, right? Now I know so much more about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy. I know so much more about Hashem that's implicit in the tshuva process in and of itself. And that's another way that a person can recognize that their original concept was more limited. And then there's a diuk also on this word, Elikusai, is that ultimately a person comes to know just how sweet they are and just how deep they are. And a person has to do tshuva al tshuvasai, meaning a tshuva for the initial conception, because not only did it mean that I was magshim God, right, where a person had a more limited definition of who Hashem is, it turns out that a person had a much more limited definition of who their own soul was. And that goes back to Shir Na'im. If you remember, how could we forget what we learned? The Rebbe Nachman says that the soul is mamish like an elephant, right, with a mouse like we had running around, and the elephant is stepping around and is allowing itself to be, like Rebbe Nachman says, pulled along by the nose, and calls them because it doesn't know she'eni yadei mikoichai. It doesn't know its strength. And that's how the Rebbe defines and the Gemara in Saita that tells us about a ruach shtus, a spirit of folly that causes a person to sin. What is that spirit of folly? It's this, that a person forgets their own holiness. Once a person does tshuva, they reintroduce themselves to the sweetness, the essential holiness that they have inside. And it turns out that not only did I transgress against God, I actually, in a certain sense, I transgressed against myself. So if you go back to the words, Al Shehisgashem Es Roimamus Eloi Kusai. Not just that you transgressed against the roimamus, the incredible exaltedness of God's godliness, but I want to say Eloi Kusai, a person sort of limited their own elokus, their own divinity, their own godliness, the way that they're chelik lekamimal. How could a person have sinned? How could a person be this tremendous elephant that's super powerful, and a person is giving in to the little mouse, the Yitzhahara? Be that as it may, there are two levels here of tshuva al tshuvasai. The first is a tshuva mamish on the tshuva itself. The second is a tshuva for the initial hasaga, koidim the perfect tshuva, where a person, vis-a-vis their current experience of godliness, was magshim, and that needs tikkun. Says the Rebbe, Zebechinas Olam Haba. This kind of tshuva is an aspect of Olam Haba, Shihikula Shabbos, which is a total aspect of Shabbos. Hainu, which really means Kula Tshuva. It's all an aspect of return. Kama shekasav v'shavta ad Hashem alekecha. You shall return until HaKadosh Baruch Hu is your God. That's what it really means, really, right? At a simple level, it means return until Hashem your God. But it means you shall return until HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes alekecha again. And that word v'shavta is, of course, the letters v'shabbos. Shabbos, which is a me'ein olam haba. That me'ein olam haba, Shabbos, is a bechina of malchus. That's the bechina of bisvasav kibduni. And olam haba, the olam haba itself is always Binah, which is kisei hakavod, right? And that's the aspect of the lave. So again, you see the connection between Shabbos, malchus, and olam haba, Binah. Mouth, words, and heart. Ki ikar olam haba hu hasagas alikusai. What's olam haba all about? A person rising ever higher in perceptions of godliness that get more and more refined, more and more cleansed, deeper and deeper and deeper in ways that we can't even imagine. We don't know anything. We have to always remember that. Whatever we learn, you have to ground it in a context of fundamental inadequacy from the standpoint of us grasping anything. We know infinitely less than we don't know. Or, in other words, we don't know always infinitely more than we know. We don't even know how little we know because we don't even know what's out there. We don't know anything. A person always has to learn anything with that fundamental humility. A person, says the Moharan, is supposed to get up after sitting in front of a sefer knowing less than they knew when they sat down, because now they see how little they know. And the Moharan says that if you stand up after learning something and you think you know more, he says you didn't learn. Because the process of learning is not to gain knowledge, but it's to gain humility. It's just to discover how much more there is, right, that a person really hasn't plumbed the depth of. There's so much that we don't know. I'd say my favorite word is mystery. Trump's favorite word is tariff. My favorite word is mystery. Mystery, mystery, mystery. Everything's a mystery. You can't be so rigid in your beliefs. We don't know anything. So every person has to know what they know, but at the same time grounded in the humility of knowing that I don't know anything. There's an infinite world out there. Hester. Mystery, Nister. Excellent. Mystic. Hester. It's all a mystery. So the Rebbe says that's what Olam Haba is. You just rise deeper and deeper and higher and higher. Yelchu michayil el chayil. A person keeps on going higher and higher. And there will be many different levels of Yedu I see, of knowing Hashem, because there's still the distinction between Katan and Gadol. Right? That means that there's still the distinction between the initial tshuva and then tshuva al tshuvasai. And then guess what? Tshuva al tshuvasai. And tshuva al tshuva. And this second level of tshuva al tshuvasai is infinite, because the process doesn't stop after the second tshuva. A person did the first kind of tshuva, was makshem alikusai, recognizes now he broke into a brand new realm of recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy and everything else, has to do tshuva on that. Boom, did another tshuva, you have a new hasaga, a new tshuva. And this is called tshuva al tshuvasai ein sofit. It goes forever. And that's the bechina of Olam Haba v'yedu I see, limikatana v'ad gedolam, and a person will continuously climb that ladder from being a katan, and then becoming a gadol, and then recognizing that in relation to the next level I'm a katan, and then becoming a gadol again, and then a katan again, and then a gadol again, and so on. Nimtza v'chol eishi asigu asagi yesera. Every time that a person is masig a brand new level of perception, as I tshuva ala saga arishayna, and the Rebbe uses those words b'chal eis because it's a never-ending process. It goes and goes and goes and goes, and that construct of katan to gadol, which then becomes the next katan to gadol, is going to become incredibly important for the rest of the lesson. So keep that construct in mind. After the Rebbe explains this whole thing, this is the depth of the Gemara over there in Sanhedrin, which tells us whoever shechs Yetzer Hara. I'm just going to say the Gemara outside first, and then we'll get into the Rebbe's drasha. It says, a person who shechs the Yetzer Hara and does vidui, mamash like a person would on a carbon. It's as if the person honored Hashem in two worlds. Says the Rebbe, everything that we've learned so far in the lesson is wrapped up into this very enigmatic line from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Says the Rebbe, what does it mean? This is the aspect of doing tshuva. Bechinas v'libi chalal b'kirbi. Like we said, David HaMelech emptied out the ventricle of his heart. Bechinas doim laHashem, and the way that he accomplished that, chalalim, is a direct result of the beginning of the pasuk that refers to turning dam into doim. Bechinas doim laHashem. Bechinas ekye. Bechinas keser. Bechinas kavod, and that's the whole link of concepts that bridges the gap between Ekya ba'astaras panim, which is dam, and then daim, ekya anazaman l'mehevi, keser, chav, to kavod, u'misvad alav, and in that Gemara, it means that vidui, so to speak, was hainu hach, part of the tshuva process. He was shechting his Yetzer Hara, don't want that anymore, and then he did the vidui. But says the Rebbe, look at the Gemara. The Gemara's words seem to describe a two-tiered tshuva process. There are two steps. Number one, zeveach, as Yitzray, says the Rebbe, that's tshuva rishayna. And then umisvade alav is not doing vidui on, like smicha and vidui on the carbon, but rather it's doing vidui and tshuva on the tshuva. Umisvade alav, hainu shemisvade al zvichas Yitzray, not on the Yetzer that you just shechted as a carbon, but a person does tshuva on that tshuva. That a person's doing tshuva on that initial tshuva, like we discussed. Says the Gemara, you honored HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and again the wording is very precise because kavod is everything that's being accomplished over here when a person is zeveach es Yitzray, which is zeveach toida yechabdanani. That word kavod, that's a passing in Tehillim. Kilu kibdu la'akadosh baruch hu b'shnei olamos ki tshuva harishayna, because the initial tshuva is b'chinas kavod olam hazeh. That's the aspect of kavod olam hazeh. And no matter how many tshuvas that a person does in that iterative process, where a person again recognizes, wow, I didn't do tshuva properly, meaning my tshuva itself was full of pnius, and they do tshuva on that tshuva, it could be that, again, vis-a-vis that first tshuva, the second tshuva is also full of pnius, meaning vis-a-vis a third, and then a person does that. That's all still within the bechin of kavod olam hazeh. right, where the teshuva is not complete. Once a person's teshuva is complete, v'achra teshuva, where a person merits shazoichal asagi yisera, where a person merits a brand new or expanded conception of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, umaka b'yoser as roima musalikusa v'asa teshuva al teshuvasai, and a person then accomplishes the process of teshuva al teshuvasai, zois ha-teshuva hi b'chinas kvoid olam haba. This aspect is called kvoid olam haba. Like we said, because Olam Haba is Shabbos. Shabbos is v'shavta ad Hashem alikecha, and it's a constant hasaga of that's increasing, right? Kula miyedvasi limik tanava ad gedola miyelcho mechayalacha, where a person keeps on rising higher and higher and higher and higher. This is currently where I'm up to in the book that I've been writing for 4 years, and there's 230 pages until here. I was mitzamtzim ma'od. There are a lot of sugyas here that I didn't get into. I hinted to some of them, but so just to give you an idea of how deep the sefer is, you can go on and on and on and on and on. It's absolutely incredible. Hashem should help me to finish it.
The actual physical act of vidui and smith and that is actually you have to push weight.
Therefore,
weight up. So you have to kind of push down any idea that you had before, the whole idea of children.
Suppressing.
Right?
Interesting. Okay.
Push away, you have to push down.
Gewaldig. Beautiful. It's a Gemara in Psachim, based on a pasuk in Zechariah, that tells us R Yikaris v'Kifayan means a light that used to be yakar, that used to be precious, and will in the time of Mashiach be Kifayan. It will be kafui. It will be like dim and dull. And the Gemara says R Yakar ba'elam hazeh yakafa v'kala elam haba. That light that was very beautiful in this world will be mamish dim vis-a-vis the light of Olam Haba. Says the Rebbe, what's that talking about? Mamish, what we're learning about. Because if teshuva al teshuvasai is bechina of kvoid Olam Haba, which is the bechina of Shabbos Yom Shekulei Shabbos, and that whole experience is because a person had a deeper hasaga that enabled them to recognize that their initial hasaga was very dim, says the Rebbe, that's mamish what the Gemara is telling you. The light that will shine in Olam Haba is infinitely greater than the light of Olam Hazeh, which in our context means that the second teshuva or after a person does teshuva, it enables a person having experienced a bechina of Olam Haba, which is v'shavta ad Hashem alikecha, v'Shabbos, which is Geulah Tshuva shemagasat kisei hakavod, the world of Binah, which is itself is synonymous with Olam Haba, looks back and says, "Wow, R Yikaris Kifaya, that R Yakar, that light that I thought that was what Hashem was before I did tshuva, kaf v'kal. That's not it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinitely more merciful than I ever dreamed of. Haraya, He took me back." Right, Kadosh Baruch Hu took me back, and Hashem sent tzaddikim that are teaching about Yemin Chashem Shuta, the Kabul Shavim, as we're going to learn at the end of the Torah. Ar shahu yakar ba'elam hazeh yakafa v'kala elam haba nimtza, says the Rebbe, emerges that ba'olam haba kishi yiskul asagi yiser ba'lekusai, when a person accesses a brand new perception of Elikus, certainly a person will do tshuva over their this worldly perception, right, which is a bechina of the person's initial tshuva, which is very, very pagum, very blemished. Because that person's original perception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the original perception of sin, and the original perception of their own elokus, of their own soul, was very caricatured, was very limited vis-a-vis the perception of Olam Haba. Therefore, it's as if the person now brought honor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'shnei olamayos. Which two worlds? Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. Because Ar Yikaris v'Kifayan. Because that means that the person went through the entire experience of having honored HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Olam Hazeh through Bisvasav Kivduni, even though V'liba Richak Mimeni, in some sense, right, where a person was distant from a true Hasag of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that honored God in this world, and then a person moves into a brand new experience of Olam Haba, wherein the light that was initially yakar is now seen as being kafoi, and that's a bechina of Olam Haba, kilu kibla HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'shnei olamis. Ki azvicha zeyetzer hi tshuva rishayna. The initial tshuva is the zvicha zeyetzer b'chinas kvoid Olam Hazeh. That's the aspect of kvoid Olam Hazeh. Va'avidui al zvicha zeyetzer hu tshuva shniya hi b'chinas kvoid Olam Haba. But the second tshuva, which is the vidui that's referenced in the Gemara, and then umisvada alav, which is a second step, That's a bechina of kavod elam haba. He bechinas kavod elam haba shakavod rishon. Now it's a kavod v'kal neged hakavod hasheni. The second tshuva enables a person to realize that first tshuva and the hasaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with which that tshuva was done was very kafoi v'kal. If you're keeping track, and it's important, if you don't mind passing the water, at this point is important to suggest, thank you so much if we can, at this point it's important to set up the model like this, and this is the point where the Mefarshim do this and be anachal, where there are 4 stages. Stage number 1 is where a person's not even on the structure, which is called ekya ba'acharayim, right? The person is not anywhere. It's as if the tshuva process has not begun. It's dormant, but it exists in potential. And the most beautiful thing is that where does it exist in potential? Not in the holiest part of you, but in the dam itself, right? Because there's no tshuva without chet, right? And so in a certain sense, like the Baal Shem HaKadosh teaches, you can't spell chet without an aleph. Well, no. You can spell chet without an aleph, but so why is there that hidden aleph there? Says the Baal Shem, that's the hidden alakus that's even within a chet, right? Which is that once a person does a chet, now all of a sudden it's like a hechsher mitzvah in some strange way, but it has to obviously be authentic, right? And a person can just go into it because I'm reactive ashavim speaking biyad lasis tshuva. It has to be an authentic sin. Kiviyachol means despite a person's best efforts to stay away from it, there's the potential now for doing tshuva. So the ekya ba'acharayim is mamish in the dam, which is an incredible hasaga. Okay, that's like stage 1, but a person hasn't really begun. Then there's the bechina of a person who is doing the first level, which isn't really tshuva, but it's ekya on a zaman l'mahavi, and that's the bechina of kishiyishma bizyoinoi, where a person hears his bizayon and yidoim v'yishtaik. Or let's go back to what the Rebbe says in the bottom of the first column. Hashoimim charpasam ve'enam hashivim. That's level number 2, right? But that's sort of level number 1 of tshuva, where now ekya transferred from being ekya b'acharayim into ekya proper, into ekya mamish, and a person hears themselves being embarrassed, they transfer dam to daim. Then the next level this is the higher level, where it's not just that a person doesn't answer, but mamish v'lo yedaktek al bizin kvaydai. And that's called Shuva Rishayna. That's called Kfayda Olam Hazeh, which is going to be the 3rd level. So Ekya B'acharayim, Ekya, Kfayda Olam Hazeh, and then you have the final level, which is Kfayda Olam Haba, which is Mamish Keser, right? Which is Havaya, where a person isn't just Ekya, where I want to be about Shuva, right? But a person Mamish is, and that's Havaya. Okay, you're keeping track? So these are 4 levels, but really bad some, they're really 3 levels, right? Because the first level doesn't really count because it's like sort of the ground for that, where a person hasn't begun. This is all, I'm telling you, it's crucially important for the rest of the lesson to understand the brilliance of the structure, to be able to map it out in this way and to have clarity. If you can, try before the SHIURIM that we're going to be giving the rest of the week. We'll be exploring the rest of Torah Vav. Try to take a couple of minutes and just review it. It's very quick. Just mamish run through it. Try to get as the best fluency. We're not learning a bi'iyah. Halavai that we should know the whole Likutei Moharan on our fingertips. I used to, as a bacher, walking the streets of Yerushalayim, I used to just review with friends, balpeh, the lessons backwards and forwards, mamish, with all the different, and it's a tainug, nifla. Like if you're able to go and the string of concepts and mamar chazal and psukim and it's kabbalah, you become mamish fluent. Halavai, that would be ideal if we could do that, on the whole Likutei Moharan one day. But for now, at least, let's just try to really get clarity in what we learned so far, especially in this 4-fold structure. Ekya b'acharayim, Ekya, K'vod Olam Hazeh, and K'vod Olam Haba. Okay, these 4 things. Let's finish up for today. V'zeh sha'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu eila sisa v'acharashti dimisa yes'ei chamoicha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, these things that you have done, and I have been silent. Dimisa yes'ei chamoicha. You thought I was like you. Whoa! So what's this pasuk saying? Says the Rebbe. It contains a lot of familiar concepts. Silence, ekya. What's going on? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a Pashup Pshat is saying to the people, you thought that I was like one of you, meaning that I don't care about the things that you don't care about. You thought that it's okay for a person to go along and live a life of sin and corruption and cruelty and so on. And God is silent because God is one of us. And what does God really care? Says Rebbe Nachman, Ki Adam Machrish, when a person is silent, Nasa B'chinas Ekya. Right? And this produces Ekya. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's like a bit of a strange thing, but he has to deal with this pasuk somehow. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't be fooled that somehow my staying silent to your embarrassing me is because I need to reach some higher madrega. In Ki'ilu, like you're doing me a service where you're helping God do tshuva. It's some strange, twisted way where that's why I've been silent, because I'm practicing a dime, right? And so says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says Rebbe Nachman, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Masha Machros La'adam, when God is silent that a person is doing a sin, no. Ein zeh b'shvil ekya. This is not because God is trying to reach some madrega or be megala something of ekya chas v'shalom, because that ain't shaykh eitz HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is not relevant. This is not relevant at all to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ein zeh ala kadeshi yikablo anshem ba'olam haba. No, this is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives bechira, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows a person to live in this world. And at the end of the day, a person, there's schar v'aynesh. So that's the end of that pasuk. So going back to the beginning of the pasuk, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying this, that you've embarrassed me and I've stayed silent. You thought that it's because I'm trying to reach the level of ekya. That the same way a human being turns dam into daim by being silent, and that turns ekya b'acharayim into the first level of tshuva, which is ekya, says Hashem, that's not relevant for me. The reason why I'm staying silent is not because I'm doing Likutei Moharan Torah Vav and making tikkun for myself. I'm God. The reason that I'm staying silent is because is because there's bechira in the world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is staying silent in that way. But ultimately, to a person is living life connected to the seichel sheish b'chal davar. A person is living life connected to the oimrim loy of hamtein, to the katalisa erva achaveka. A person whose svasav kibduni is not v'liba richak mimedi, but is connected to the heart of the world, to an ideal reality, to olam haba, to Binah, to ima ilah, to that realm of the world of bria, to that realm of the shem sag, right, mamash, of an ideal world. Such a person realizes that God is not silent. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mamash whispering to us all the time, calling us back. Kol yom yotze b'askel ma'achariv, shuvu banim shayvavim. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody who listens to the recordings. Ashracha, Ashreinu. Have a wonderful day. Ani haben v'ata ha'av shali shekol kach ohev oti ha'av shali melech chai v'kayam al kol neshima she'ani